Hey everyone, and welcome to The Explainer. I am absolutely thrilled you're joining us today. Look, we are putting together what I really consider to be a definitive masterclass on finding the confidence to, finally, just call yourself a writer. If you've ever struggled with imposter syndrome, and let's be honest, who hasn't? Or if you felt like you're just sitting around waiting for some kind of external validation before you can take your creative passions seriously, well, this explainer was built entirely for you. We're going to break down the incredible, hard-earned wisdom of one of the greatest literary minds of our time to help you find your own creative sovereignty. Okay, let's dive right in. To ground our masterclass today, we're pulling directly from an absolutely legendary source, the fall 1993 issue of the Paris Review. In it, Toni Morrison gave this famously intimate, deeply revealing interview about the daily realities of her writing process, and she drops some absolute gold here. She completely dispels that tired myth of the tortured, chaotic artist, and instead, she offers this highly structured, deliberate approach to truly mastering the craft. So here is our syllabus for today's masterclass. We'll start with number 1, claiming the writer identity. 2, the ritual of drafting. 3, finding your creative voice. 4, the art of critical distance. And finally, 5, deep revision versus fretting. All right, kicking things off with section 1, claiming the writer identity, overcoming the need for permission. What is so fascinating to me is how brilliantly Morrison separated her day job from her writing life. For years, she worked as a highly successful editor at Random House. A standard 9 to 5. That was her public expected identity. But her identity as the writer, she kept that entirely private. In fact, she never even told her colleagues at Random House that she was writing her first novel, The Bluest Eye. They literally only found out when they read a review of it in the New York Times. She kept it a secret because, well, she feared they might fire her. But more importantly, she wanted to own the work completely herself, totally shielded from the expectations and judgments of her corporate life. And this perfectly illustrates why claiming that title of writer is just so incredibly difficult. Morrison pointed out something wild. She noticed that when reading biographies of women writers, almost all of them had this little anecdote about a mentor or a husband or a teacher who finally told them, okay, go ahead, you can do it. Historically, marginalized people and women often felt like they were stepping into this male preserve, right? A terrain where they had no providence. They just didn't feel that natural entitlement to declare themselves writers. They waited for authority figures to validate them. So I really have to ask, who are you waiting for? Are you waiting for an agent, an editor, maybe a partner or a teacher to tap you on the shoulder and hand you a permission slip to be a writer? Because Morrison's entire career is a testament to the fact that you absolutely cannot wait for that tap. Instead, you have to build what she calls creative sovereignty. And she took very tactical, literal steps to protect her art. First, she made the active decision to stop trusting her future to the whims of companies or people who supposedly knew better. Second, she kept the early writing process completely under wraps to maintain ownership, because the second you tell people, they get involved, and boom, you lose that sovereignty. And finally, she famously refused to sign publishing contracts early on. Why? Because she didn't want the writing to morph into forced homework, with some publisher just tapping their watch waiting on her. She maintained total control until the work was genuinely ready. Moving right along to section 2, the ritual of drafting, grounding the process. So let's look at the physical practice of writing. Morrison had an exact, highly disciplined sequence to get the words out of her head. Step 1. She woke up before the sun, drank dark coffee, and literally watched the light arrive. Step 2, she always drafted her initial ideas physically. We're talking a yellow legal pad and a number 2 Dixon Ticonderoga pencil. She did not trust speaking into a tape recorder. Step 3, only after the drafting was done would she actually type it into a computer. And step 4, the really grueling work. She would revise a single passage 6, 7, even 13 times. No chaotic artist here. This was a rigorous routine. Now that pre-dawn wake-up, it wasn't just to get some quiet time away from her kids, even though, yeah, that is how it started. She cultivated this into a ritual to enter what she called the non-secular space. It's this mysterious, almost sacred mental environment. For Morrison, waking up in the pitch dark and waiting for the light was the signal that enabled her to become a pure conduit for her imagination. It wasn't about being in the light, it was about being present to watch it arrive. Every writer has to figure out their own ritual to access that exact space. Okay, so now we're in that non-secular space. Let's hit section 3, finding your creative voice, sovereignty over the page. You know how you always hear writers say, oh my gosh, my characters just took over the book, they started writing themselves. Yeah, Morrison absolutely rejected that. Her response to her own characters was commanding and honestly pretty hilarious. Shut up, leave me alone, I am doing this. That is literally what she told her character Pilate while writing Song of Solomon. Pilate was getting a little too interesting and overwhelming the rest of the cast, so Morrison stepped in, took her power back, and limited Pilate's dialogue. It's such a great reminder. It's your book. Characters are ghosts. They can't write. Only you can. And to keep that ultimate control, she set some incredibly strict ethical boundaries. Morrison insisted on fully inventing her characters. She refused to just drop real people into her stories. She actually said that scavenging from the living was like acting as a succubus, just feeding off someone else's reality. Real people, she argued, have a patent on their own lives. True imagination and genuine creative freedom only happen when you completely invent the people on the page. You have to rely on your own intellect, not steal someone else's biography. So once you've drafted this fully invented world, you have to transition from that passionate drafting phase into the cool analytical phase, which brings us to section 4, the art of critical distance, editing yourself. 20. That is how many years Toni Morrison spent working as a senior editor in the publishing industry. So listen, when she talks about the difference between good writing and great writing, she is speaking with profound authority from both sides of the desk. And out of all her experience, what did she believe was the single most vital skill a writer could develop? It's the ability to read your own work with the necessary critical distance. She firmly believed that being a good reader of your own writing is the highest creative compliment you can possibly pay yourself. Her instructions on how to actually pull this off are so spot on. She says, go away from it. Read it as though it's the very first time you've ever laid eyes on it. She warns us, don't get all involved in your thrilling sentences. We all know that feeling, right? When you're writing, you just fall in love with how clever you sound. But to edit effectively, you have to separate yourself emotionally from all that writerliness. Approach the text like a complete stranger. That is the only way to objectively see what's actually working and what's just you showing off. Which segues perfectly into section 5, deep revision versus fretting, the final polish. Now, this is a massive distinction every aspiring writer needs to hear. Morrison saw a stark, clear line between revision and fretting. True revision is going back in, reworking a piece 6, 7, 13 times to make it quietly powerful and incredibly exact. But fretting is when you are just working a piece to death. And why do we fret? Usually it's because the passage fundamentally just isn't working at its core. When you catch yourself just fretting over a paragraph, Morrison says you need the courage to scrap it entirely and start over. The ultimate goal of all this deep revision is captured so beautifully here. I don't trust a performance. Morrison famously refused to read her drafts out loud. She felt a vocal performance could easily trick her into thinking a weak sentence was actually strong, just because she gave it a good rhythm with her voice. But think about it. The reader sitting at home doesn't hear your voice. The language has to work quietly on the page. The rhythm, the measure, the unsaid spaces between the words, all of that has to carry the power on its own. To achieve that kind of quiet power, we have to toss out another romantic myth. The writer typing furiously in a fit of passionate rage or overwhelming sadness. Morrison argued that writing actually requires a cold, cold thought. Fleeting emotions like anger or loneliness, they're just too tiny. They can't possibly sustain a massive creative project that takes years to finish. Anger doesn't produce anything lasting. You need a sustained, cool, highly disciplined intellect to cross the finish line of a novel. And when you combine that cool intellect with a total refusal to wait for anyone's permission, you achieve this. Writing becomes the ultimate act of taking control. The outside world might be completely chaotic, full of despair, or willful ignorance, but on the page, as Morrison says, you make order out of chaos. Even if you're writing a story about disorder, you are the one controlling it. You are completely sovereign at that point. So I'm going to leave you with this. We've walked through the rituals, the mindset, the strict ethical boundaries, and that cool detachment you need to really do this work. The permission slip, it isn't coming in the mail. That creative sovereignty is already yours for the taking. So, are you ready to pick up your pencil, step into that non-secular space, and make some order out of the chaos? Thanks so much for joining me for this explainer, and I will see you next time as we keep breaking down the ideas that truly matter.